Hey guys, welcome back. So first and foremost, I want to thank you guys for all the love and support. It means a lot and you guys are absolutely the best. Like, them comments was pulling on my heartstrings a little bit, but I appreciate you guys. So now let's get back into Symbiote Spider-Man Alien Reality, because there's still a couple issues left that we got to talk about that it came through prior to the hiatus, and I hope that this series continues at some point in time, but I haven't heard anything about it yet, but we'll see. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so prior to this point, with both Doctor Strange and Peter finding out that it was Baron Mordo who was behind all of this and had taken Doctor Strange's place as the Sorcerer Supreme, and when this had happened, Strange had looked into Mordo's mind and he had got some information just before getting Peter and getting out of there. And right when Peter and Strange had left, one of the things that we had discovered when they had left Natasha behind is that she was actually working for Baron Mordo the entire time. But with the little information that Strange had got from Baron Mordo, he didn't specifically discover that Natasha was working with him, but even still he could tell that something about her wasn't right. And when he pulls Peter from the Sanctum Sanctorum back over to Carnage, he vaguely tells Peter about his suspicions of her, and when Peter tries to defend her, he just lets Peter know, like, look bruh, at best ain't none of this real. But even still, Strange, he agrees to entertain Peter's concern for Red Cat, and he tells him like they'll go back to the outside of the Sanctum and figure out a way to get her out, and hopefully Mordo just won't expect them being back so soon. And so they pop up and they leave right away with Morbius still outside, thinking he had them cornered in Carnage, but now realizing that he doesn't, he'll more than likely just go on about his way. But when Peter and Strange get back to the Sanctum, and at this point they're trying to figure out the best strategy as far as when and how to go in and get Natasha, but in the middle of this she just pops up. And mind you, when she does, it does not set off Peter's spider sense, and we'll get to more on why in just a little bit. But when she shows up here, like Peter, he immediately embraces her, but Strange, he wants more specifics on how she got out. And her story from there is that she stuck around just to get more information from the Goblin and Mordo, to where at that time she untied herself and used knockout gas to escape. But the extra information that she claims that she received was that Baron Mordo hid the Word of God in the Nightmare Realm. And because Peter has no idea where the Nightmare Realm is or how to get there, Strange has to give him a bit of a recap. But on top of this, he also tells Peter why it makes a lot of sense that Mordo would hide the Word of God there. Because even though the Nightmare Realm sits within the dream dimension, that's exactly why it's also a place where the imagination of humanity, it manifests in a number of forms before any of which are made reality. And the power within this book, it more or less acts like a bridge to bring thoughts of imagination into reality, which is why it will make sense for Mordo to hide it there, in theory hoping it would be the last place that Doctor Strange would look, but also with doing this, putting it right under the nose of one of Doctor Strange's greatest enemies, with that being Nightmare himself. But also at this point, with Strange's resources being limited and him not being able to perform magic and only use certain trinkets, like with this being the case, a sling ring isn't necessarily going to do the job. So then when they come to the conclusion that Strange and Peter got to do it the old-fashioned way, Natasha conveniently has some knockout gas, which she's able to use to send them on their way. And as soon as she's done, she reports to Hobgoblin, letting him know that everything is going as planned. But in the case of Peter and Strange, when they make their way into the Dream Realm, which essentially is step 1 before you splinter off into the Nightmare Realm, but like as soon as they arrive, it's here where we get a bit more of a look into this on again and off again switch between the symbiote and Peter Parker. Because when they arrive here in the Dream Realm, in what appears to be the Daily Bugle, like it doesn't take long for Strange to figure out that this once again is not Peter Parker. And first, just to get it out of the way, the reason why it's appearing to be the Daily Bugle, it's mainly because the nightmares which the symbiote will experience, for the most part, they're based upon Peter's fears. And for that reason, they'll all be tugged between these different fears that Peter's kind of suppressed or tucked away. But even furthermore, when the symbiote begins to express why he had kind of just took the wheel and left Peter kind of in the passive state, if you will, like his reason for doing this now, it was mainly because of Peter's traumatic response to the death of Aunt May within this reality. Because after that had happened here, Peter froze up. So the symbiote just figured instead of having Peter just getting locked up, it took the wheel and got them out of there, because in the moment Peter just couldn't handle it. But even in this moment, like the symbiote's a bit curious, like how did Strange figure all this out? And Strange admits, like aside from the obvious aggression that the symbiote shows, which Peter wouldn't, Strange also noticed that the symbiote itself doesn't have a spider sense, which Peter does. And with Strange seeing these things, especially after their first conversation outside of Carnage, it was more than enough to lead him to believe that the symbiote had taken over again. But here's the thing, like while they're in the dream realm, the symbiote is not able to fully keep Peter on autopilot, and in order for them to get from the dream realm into the nightmare realm, they then gotta lean from something that Peter usually dreams about and put that focus towards one of Peter's nightmares. And because the symbiote and Peter both share a mind, as soon as the symbiote asks like what scares Spider-Man, immediately J. Jonah Jameson as Deathlock just shows up, just blasting his way through the Daily Bugle. And when this happens, Peter is put back to the forefront because they all appeared in his dream, so to get to the nightmare realm, it has to be his nightmare. But when they try to escape from J. Jonah Deathlock Jameson, and Peter jumps through what appears to be the front glass door of the Daily Bugle, but when he does this, he appears at the 59th Street Bridge at the same moment of the death of Gwen Stacy. And when this happens, it's like there's no question that he's definitely made that crossover from the dream realm to the nightmare realm, with Peter being taken to one of the worst moments that he's ever experienced. And even though this time around he catches her correctly and he actually saves Gwen, but even when he does, she's still killed by the Green Goblin, who more or less lets Peter know that he can't just change history. And regardless of how he feels about it, the death of Gwen Stacy was something that needed to happen, because in a number of ways it made Spider-Man the man that he is today. And like really with this happening, we know that the nightmares come from ideas which already exist in Peter's mind. So to some extent he already knows this, and this nightmare is really just his thoughts manifesting in different ways, which we immediately see right after when he gets his hands on the Goblin, only to find out that this Goblin is Mary Jane, who he never would have been with had Gwen Stacy still been alive. And this immediately makes me think of an old Spider-Man team up, which at the time it came out in 1976, and Spider-Man had traveled to the future to team up with Killraven, and the future that Spider-Man arrived in back in this issue was 2019, which is kind of crazy just thinking of all these future stories in which it came out like in the 70s and 80s, and just thinking about how their future is now our past. Like, it's kind of trippy. But back in this issue when Spider-Man had teamed up with Killraven, who we had talked about a while back with like Infinity Warps and Ghost Panther and much of Killraven's history with the Martian Masters, but at this time when Spider-Man had jumped into the future, into the middle of this narrative, he had been hit with a hallucinogenic gas, which at the time had made him believe that he was fighting the Green Goblin. And in that story, much like this one, when he unmasked the Goblin's identity had appeared to him as Mary Jane. And back at that time, we got a deeper reasoning to the meaning why Peter was seeing Mary Jane as the Green Goblin, and it was mainly based around his guilt for falling in love with Mary Jane after the death of Gwen Stacy. So with us seeing this here, it's like legitimately one of Peter's nightmares that just has a number of deep layers to it. But it's here where Strange kind of pulls Peter back and reminds him that this isn't real, and when he does, they're then met by the daughter of Nightmare, Daydream. And so now technically, like as far as the time when Symbiote Spider-Man is taking place, like Daydream isn't supposed to come around until like years later, because everything that happened with her first appearance in Incredible Hulk Volume 2 issue 77, which was the beginning of Tempest Fugit, which was also written by Peter David, like time-wise, like none of that has happened yet. But the reason she's able to appear here is because in the dream realm and all the realms within, they don't function in a linear fashion. And in the dream world, everything's happening at once, so if it will happen, it already has. But when she finds them here, she gives them a way to find Nightmare directly, which you would think would be a doorway like into the horrors of horrors, but instead when they walk through, they just find him sitting there at a book signing. But when Peter and Strange get there, and Strange is like, okay, cut the games, you know why I'm here, which then causes Nightmare to flip out, and mainly because this whole thing isn't a game to him. And when he does flip out, which doesn't scare Strange in the least, but in the case of Peter, it's another story. Like, I think he got a little bit of Peter running down the Parker right now. But as it turns out, Nightmare agreed to help them immediately. And not so much for the reason of him worrying about someone like Doctor Strange coming to get the book, but rather he was worried about someone more powerful than him discovering that it was in his realm, and them coming for the book, and after that, them coming for Nightmare, knowing that he had played some part in keeping it. And when Nightmare hands the book over to Doctor Strange, we quickly find out that this isn't the actual book, but instead this was a trick that Mordo had played in order to get Peter and Strange to head into the Nightmare realm. And when this happens, not only did Mordo want Strange to know that the book was fake, but Strange also realizes that his sling ring was stolen, which Natasha had taken when Peter and Strange had entered the dream realm. And to add a little bit extra, Mordo did a time freezing spell to keep their bodies from waking up, because ultimately that would be like an easy way out. But aside from that, like in addition to what Mordo allows Strange to see, like after Mordo discovers that Natasha's job is done, he then destroys the real book, and he allows Strange to see this happening. So at this point he'll know that the book is destroyed so that no one can undo this reality which Mordo had created. And so now real quick, I want to give a shout out to all the Patreons, and we also got some new patrons for this month. So shout out to Danian C, Andre T, Now W, Andrew JF, Kingpin H, Zach L, and Geruda. And I hope I pronounced that last one right. But thanks to all of you guys for all your support, and if you're new here and you want more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But also I want to say this one last thing before we go, because I always feel like this part is like the post credit of all the videos, and that's not the thing I wanted to say, but either way, like where Symbiote Spider-Man goes from here, like in the Nightmare Realm. And not to start the conversation prematurely, because we'll definitely get into it for the next video, but where it goes from here in the concept of the Nightmare Realm and where that stands in Marvel Comics in connection to the Dream Realm and alternate realities, like it gets deep. So to say the least, prepare yourselves because we're gonna have a deep dive in that one. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.